So the other day, I was reading through one of the online shooting groups that I'm in, and a guy came forward and admitted that a few months back he had a negligent discharge at home. He was getting ready to do some dry practice and accidentally shot his pistol into his fridge and into the drywall and made it a bit of a mess. Luckily, no one was hurt, but he wanted to bring it up to just, kind of remind everyone about the risks related to handling these firearms. And this is someone that was, doing competitions on a regular basis, doing a lot of dry practice, going to the range often, put a good deal of thought into safety. And I think he could have done a slightly better job. I'll talk about some of the procedures that might have helped him out there, but all things considered, this was not Billy Bob, shooting one into the floor in his double wide or whatever it is, right? The what you might typically think of when you think of negligent discharges happening. So let's talk about some of the procedures that I use and that might help you out. Overall, I'd call this method a belt and suspenders approach. You can use multiple methods that can fail independently, and if any one of them fails to identify a live round in the chamber or fails to clear it, you have other stuff going on that's going to act as a backup. Now, anytime that you're performing these kind of clearings, the temptation is to get it done and over with as quickly as possible, especially if you're someone who's doing dry practice on a daily basis. You're trying to get in, sneak in maybe a 10-minute dry practice session, something like that, and maybe you haven't spent so much money that you have a dedicated sort of rig just for dry practice that's not capable of firing live rounds or never gets to touch them or whatever, right? So if you're clearing your EDC and you're trying to get it done quick, it's tempting to just get it over with quickly, but I think it's worth spending a little bit of extra time to make sure that it is done right. Now, if you're going to be clearing a pistol, its natural state should be that it is in a holster. That's where a firearm belongs anytime that you are not immediately using it. When you're ready to take it out, you take it out of the holster. When you're done with it, you put it back in the holster. And you'll probably have some procedures that you apply to the pistol before you put it back in the holster that will make it ready for defending life. But in any case, this is where it's going to start naturally. This is my Glock 19 that I carry every day, right? And so the first step is you're going to be safely removing the pistol from the holster, right? And that might depend a little bit on what your holster looks like. If you have some kind of switch that provides active retention, that there might be something specific around that. But keep in mind that as soon as you are removing it from the holster, it is becoming ready to fire, right? So that's sort of a simple way of thinking about it is holster safe. As soon as it's starting to come out of the holster, we're getting into the realm where we need to start thinking about, more carefully about where we're pointing it and all that kind of good stuff, right? So you want to make sure that you're pointing it in a safe direction when that happens. Now, if you are going to be handling your firearm, you want to do it in the safest environment that you possibly can. And I think probably one of the best places to do that would be at a firing range or in a basement, right? If you have a basement, that's fantastic. If it's completely below ground, as long as you're keeping the pistol pointed downwards, then you're going to have earth all around you. And there might be things in your garage that you don't want to shoot. Certainly you would want to not to have other people there at the time if you can possibly avoid it. That would be sort of ideal. I live in North Texas. We don't really do basements here. The ground is too solid in order to build out a basement. So we have to take other precautions in order to keep things pointed in a safe direction. In my case, I'm not going to focus too heavily on that while I'm filming this. I've already cleared the firearm. I've only got dummy rounds in here, so I'm not going to focus too much more on where I'm pointing it, but that's something that's really important for you to pay attention to. If you are maintaining your pistol properly, then in generally speaking, you should always know what the condition of that pistol is. Yeah, so this is a verification process. For my EDC pistol, if it's in my EDC holster, right, whenever it's in there, and I'm not doing a educational video or something like that, right, it's going to have a full magazine of appropriate ammunition loaded in, there's going to be a round in the chamber, and that's going to be the condition that should always be in when I'm taking it out of this particular holster. Something I have on my Glock that you would find similar to a hammer-fired pistol is I have the striker control device, right? And so it's a little flap of metal here that can articulate back and forth, and whenever the trigger is pulled, it starts to push back this flap. And so one of the precautions I'm going to take for my particular weapon is I'm going to be engaging that striker control device with my thumb in order to keep it safer. So I'm taking my pistol out of the holster now. I got my thumb over the striker control device, and if you are very confident in your pistol handling skills, there's a couple things that you can start to gather information about the condition of the weapon, right? And one of those is going to be to look at a loaded chamber indicator and to make a visual inspection of the chamber to the extent that it is visually available to you before the slide is actioned. So on this Glock 19, we have a loaded chamber indicator. It's a little ridge of metal that is a little bit raised up as opposed to where it would be if there was no round in the chamber. And I can feel that distinctly with my finger. And since I'm interacting with this piece of metal on a day-to-day basis, I know what it feels like. We can also get if we get some kind of light reflecting off of that chamber area, we get a little peak and we can see a little bit of metal in between the frame and where the chamber is located. Now, we don't want to rely on that whatsoever, right? Now, if you're really confident about your weapon handling skills, and in other words, you feel supremely confident that you're not going to get your fingers or any other objects anywhere near the trigger when you don't mean for them to be there, you can also do a little press check, right? So that's just using one hand to pull back the slide to get a little bit more light in there and to see a little bit more of that metal coming off of the round. In this case, it's a dummy round. One other thing I'll note here is that if you do not see a round there, we want to assume a 100% false negative right here. We want to assume that if we don't see a round, there's still going to be a round in there. This is just a method of giving you some information as to whether you can definitively observe a round in there and start building some confidence that a round is in fact in there. It should not help you build confidence that the round is not in there. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is remove the source of ammunition, which is the magazine. So we're going to, again, keeping our finger way away from the trigger, in this case, keeping the weapon pointed in the safest possible direction. We're going to action the magazine release, right? And I'm going to take that out. Now, what are we going to do with this magazine? Well, we want to put it somewhere where we wouldn't possibly return it into the firearm before we expect it should appropriately be loaded. And in other words, before we want to make it ready to defend life. So you're going to want to put it on the other side of the room, in a different room, wherever you think is appropriate. Before we go ahead and move that completely out of the picture, we have to consider that there's possibly a round in the chamber. And we've already gathered some information about that. We saw a little bit of metal reflecting off of there. We felt the indicator in this case. And so we're pretty confident at this point that there is a round in here, that this is a dangerous weapon at the moment. And so we want to action the slide. So unless you're balling out of control and you're just always shooting full, copper ammunition, no heavy metals all the time, we have to keep in mind that this ammunition creates toxins, right? When it is fired, such as lead. And so we want to be kind of careful about handling the ammunition, especially when we're at home, and we want to treat that ammunition like it is mildly toxic, right? As soon as it lands in our hand, it's not going to make us sick or let it explode or whatever, but we don't necessarily want to get lead debris or other heavy metals mixed in around the house, putting it, getting it onto our hands, touching our mouths or our children or our families. Before we're able to completely wash it off, all that kind of stuff. So you might want to have a dedicated vessel that you're dumping ammunition to. One other small note, I saw Reed Hendricks talk about this recently, is that as you are clearing the chamber, you might not want to completely cover the chamber with your hand as you're opening it, because there are certain very unlikely, but occasionally occurring malfunctions that can happen where, for example, the extractor might hit the primer and ignite it and cause an explosion in the chamber. And you want to have, all of your digits as far as possible away from the chamber at that time, right? And so instead of covering the hand completely and letting the round fall into your hand, which is convenient in some ways, you might want to just keep your hand farther away from the chamber and allow it to dump the round into whatever kind of vessel you want to dump it into, and let it fall to the floor. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. It's a little bit awkward with this camera angle, but we'll make it work, right? And in that case, I just dumped the dummy round out the bottom of it. So we removed our source of the ammunition. We've cleared the chamber, right? And now's a good time for the slide to be completely locked back. We're going to have to use our thumb to action the slide lock lever on your device for that to get locked back, since we don't have the follower to push it up. And now we've got the spent round, and we're doing whatever we do as part of our maintenance process with spent rounds. Maybe I'm cheap and I'm reusing self-defense ammunition if it hasn't been shot yet, and so I'm putting back into the magazine. Maybe I am a bit more cautious. I never reuse that ammunition, and I'm putting it to the side for firing at the range, whatever it is. I'm going to do whatever is part of my personal procedures for handling that ejected piece of ammunition. And now I can go ahead and take my magazine and put it wherever I put my magazine, so that I'm not possibly going to put it into the pistol prematurely. Now that we have our slide locked back, now is the time to take another peek at the chamber. And it's a little bit difficult because this is a very dark area, right? And especially have a black gun, black components or whatever that are not reflecting a lot of light. Maybe there is debris from firing ammunition that further blackens it up and decreases the reflection of the metal surface. It might be very difficult for you to discern exactly what's happening in that chamber. And so I think it's actually quite important at this point to employ a flashlight. So here's my little cheapo flashlight from Amazon, and I'm going to turn it on, and I'm looking at the chamber. Now I could say to myself, right, I ejected a round before, and so I'm good to go, right? There couldn't possibly be another round in there. But again, belt-in suspenders approach right here. What I saw was that a round came out of there, but what if I forgot to remove the magazine previously? And there was another round kicking around in there. There's all kind of little corner cases that could arise if I messed up on some previous step. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do some additional verification as to the condition of the weapon. And so I'm going to use my light to inspect the chamber. Now, one of the limitations of that approach is that, again, we're kind of looking into this little obscure hole, and we are seeing the same kind of picture over and over again, day in and day out. And the first time that we make a mistake is when there's going to be something different. And so we may be psychologically training ourselves not to see something, particularly if it's something that's hard to see, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and take a dummy round, insert it here, and I'm going to give you some idea of what that might look like instead. So here's our dummy round. I'm going to just drop it straight into the chamber. All right. And so you can see, particularly when it's dark, right? This is a dummy round that has a special kind of coloring where the primer would normally be pocketed. But you can see in general that it's not so easy necessarily to locate that round. Better if we have a flashlight, we can start to see some metal. There's all kinds of different ammunition in there that has different, different colors, different surfaces, different levels of reflectivity. So I don't necessarily want to rely on locating the ammunition in the chamber through that method. Now, if we do see a piece of ammunition in the chamber at this point, that's cause for concern, right? Because we already went through a procedure that should have caused that piece of ammunition to be pulled out of the chamber. The extractor should have caught. So maybe we have a broken extractor. Maybe we missed a step. Maybe it's time to take another look at the magwell to verify that we did in fact remove the source of ammunition like we thought we did. But that's very aberrant. It's something that should happen extremely rarely. I don't think it's ever happened to me personally. but it's something that I want to prepare for as a possibility. Now, one other nifty thing I can do with the flashlight is I can create another way of viewing whether the not only the chamber but the entire barrel is free of some kind of obstruction, right? And so what I can do is I can find like a table surface, something that is in the direction of a safest possible direction. Take that flashlight and set it down on the surface, right? And then once I've got it down on the surface, then I can align the barrel with the flashlight. And once I've got that flashlight down on the table, what I can do is I can start to shine some light through the barrel into the chamber and the rest of that whole area. And so I start to get some idea as to whether light is shining freely into that area. It may not come out so easily on film here, but it's really normally it's extremely obvious whether the barrel is free of obstruction. It's difficult to capture on film, but when you've got the right looking angle at the chamber, you can really see that light lighting up the chamber area, and it becomes really obvious whether there's some sort of obstruction in there. Again, if we take a dummy round, we place it into the chamber, and we should be able to see that there's something stopping that chamber area from being lit up by the light. And that can be a really obvious way that there's something that needs further inspection, that we need to break down the gun and take another look at it. Run a cleaning rod through there in some safe fashion, whatever it is, right? Now at this point, if you have a type of firearm that requires you to pull the trigger for whatever you're going to do next, whether that's cleaning, drive practice, whatever it is, for a Glock, obviously, you have to action the trigger in order to break it down. And obviously, if you're going to do dry practice, you're going to be working the trigger. And so at that point, if you're going to work the trigger, there's one last step that you should do, which is to point the firearm in the safest possible direction and pull the trigger, right, with the slide forward. And that is one more sanity check. Now, one idea that I've seen that I think is rather clever for people that are sort of limited in the environment where they're doing this, just get a big 5-gallon bucket of sand. You can get the bucket from your local hardware store for, $4 or something like that. You can get a 50-pound bag of sand, play sand, for maybe $5 or so, less than $10 we're talking here. Put it in the corner of your room. You can even find one that is a little bit nicer looking. And I've seen some backyard tests suggesting that typical rifle ammunition is not going to penetrate through that entire bucket of sand, and certainly it would slow it down a whole heck of a lot, and is going to provide a kind of material that is going to kind of decrease deflection compared to, let's say, a piece of steel, a body armor steel, or something like that. That might be a cheap way to provide you a fairly safe direction to pull that trigger, just in case there's something that you missed and you're about to fire the weapon. So I hope that was helpful. These are some of the methods that I use to make sure that the firearm is safe when I'm going to be using it in some non-defensive capacity. Let me know in the comments below if this is something that you are considering adopting into your own practices, or if you have some different procedures that you use for clearing your firearms.